The glass doors of Thorn Financial had never locked early. Not in 3 years, not once. So when Simone Parrish didn't answer the phone at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, the building's night security guard didn't think much of it. She was always the last one in the office. Always. He found her 20 minutes later. She was face down beside her desk, one arm stretched toward the keyboard, reading glasses still on, a cup of cold coffee beside her right hand. A ledger spreadsheet glowed on 3 monitors. Red annotations covered the printed pages fanned across the floor around her. "Miss Parrish!" He crouched and touched her shoulder. No response. "Miss Parrish!" He called for backup. Then, he called the ambulance. Then, because he had worked for the Thorn organization long enough to know the chain of command, he called the one number he was never supposed to use unless it was serious. Gideon Thorn answered on the second ring. By the time the paramedics arrived, so had 2 black SUVs. 3 men in dark suits stood quietly in the hallway, creating space without creating a scene, the way men trained by Gideon Thorn always operated. Gideon himself walked through the glass doors 4 minutes after the ambulance, still in his dress shirt from whatever dinner meeting he had left early without explanation. He looked at her on the stretcher. He looked at the 3 monitors. He looked at the printed pages scattered across the floor. Weeks of work, all of it hers, all of it annotated in red, all of it neatly organized even in collapse, because that was who Simone Parrish was. "What happened?" he asked the paramedic. "Exhaustion, possibly severe dehydration. Blood pressure is very low. We need to move her." He nodded once. "I'll follow." His assistant Agnes appeared at his elbow. "Sir, I can have someone." "I'll follow," he said again. Nobody argued. Tulane Medical Center's ER had admitted some unusual patients over the years. The quiet arrival of 4 black vehicles and 6 large men who secured a corridor without a single raised voice was unusual enough that the charge nurse later told her colleague it felt less like an emergency and more like a state visit. The attending physician, Dr. Fontaine, had been briefed before Gideon ever crossed the threshold. Whoever this woman was, the outcome mattered. Severe dehydration, Dr. Fontaine confirmed when he stepped into the waiting area. Blood pressure has stabilized. She's on IV fluids. She'll recover. Gideon exhaled slowly once. "But I want to be direct with you," the doctor continued. "Whatever her workload looked like over the past several weeks, her body gave us the answer tonight. If she had gone another 48 hours at that pace, we'd be having a very different conversation." The waiting room felt smaller than it was. Gideon stood there for a moment without speaking. He had negotiated under pressure with men who had guns on the table. He had survived things most people in New Orleans never knew happened. He was not a man who was easily shaken. "Can I see her?" "She's unconscious, but yes." He sat beside her bed for 4 hours without his phone in his hand. That alone was unprecedented enough that Agnes, waiting outside, texted one of the senior staff. He put his phone away. Something is different. The following morning, Gideon arrived at the Thorn Financial offices at 7:45. He had the building's access logs from the past 6 months printed and waiting on the conference table by 8. The senior financial director, Craig Weston, arrived last. He was the kind of man who never hurried because he had never needed to. Charming in meetings, persuasive at presentations, careful to be visible at the right moments and absent during the difficult ones. He settled into his chair with a relaxed smile. It disappeared quickly. Gideon opened the access logs without preamble. Simone Parrish, entry time average over the past 16 weeks. He turned the page toward Weston. 7:42 a.m. exit time average, 11:14 p.m. Nobody at the table spoke. Weekends. He flipped 3 pages. Present both days, every week for the past 4 months. 11 of those Sundays, she was here past 9. Gideon closed the file and looked up. I want to know why. Craig Weston shifted in his chair. Simone is very dedicated. She always volunteers. I didn't ask what she volunteered for. Gideon's voice was even. I asked why. The room fell completely silent. The answer didn't come from Craig Weston. It came from Paulette, the front desk receptionist, who had been asked to join the meeting for reasons she didn't fully understand until that moment. Because Mr. Weston reassigned his quarterly audit to her in September, Paulette said quietly, and the compliance review in October, and the year-end reconciliation that's supposed to have 3 people working it. She's been doing that alone since November. Craig Weston opened his mouth. Gideon looked at him. He closed it. Paulette continued, her voice steady now. She never said anything because she didn't want to cause problems. She told me once that if she complained, people would think she couldn't handle the workload, that she'd be the first to go. Gideon turned another page without taking his eyes off Craig Weston. The quarterly audit alone is budgeted for 120 hours. The compliance review, 90. The reconciliation, 200 minimum, with a full team. He set down the file. She was doing all 3, simultaneously alone. Nobody breathed too loudly. Then one of the junior analysts, a young woman named Tess, who had been with the company less than a year, raised her hand. "Can I say something?" Gideon nodded. "She taught me the entire reconciliation process my second week here, even though it wasn't her job. She stayed 2 extra hours every day for a week, so I wouldn't fall behind on my own work." She paused. She said she remembered what it felt like to be new and not want to ask for help. The building manager, a quiet man named Douglas, who had worked for the Thorn organization for 15 years, cleared his throat. "Last winter, when I had my surgery, she covered the building expense reports for 3 weeks so my wife wouldn't have to worry about my job. I didn't ask her to. She just did it. She brought food," someone else said, "every Friday. Left it in the break room with a little sticky note that said don't skip lunch. Didn't sign her name. We only figured out it was her after 4 months." Another voice from the back. "When I told her I was struggling with the healthcare forms for my daughter, she spent her own lunch break walking me through every step. Took 2 weeks." Memory after memory settled into the room. Not dramatic gestures, small ones. The kind that disappear into the rhythm of ordinary days and become invisible because no one marks them, because the person giving them never asked to be noticed. Gideon listened to all of it without interrupting. Then Agnes set a folder on the table in front of him. He opened it. Medical invoices, dozens of them, a New Orleans oncology center, patient Renee Parrish, relationship sister, stage 2 diagnosis, 14 months ago, treatment ongoing. Every paycheck Simone received had been divided the same way for over a year. Rent, minimum expenses, and the rest to the cancer center. There were no subscriptions to cancel, no expenses that weren't essential. She had even declined the company's annual performance bonus in December, requesting instead that it be applied directly to her sister's outstanding balance. Gideon closed the folder very carefully. Then Agnes placed one more document beside it, a single page printed from a flagged HR file. An incident note from 8 months earlier, a complaint Simone had submitted and then immediately withdrawn, asking for it to be removed from the system. The attached note explained why she withdrew it. Her ex-fiancé had ended their engagement 6 weeks before the incident. The reason, which a colleague had overheard and reported, was this: "You're exhausting to look at. Women your size aren't supposed to be this much." She had withdrawn the HR complaint because she believed no one would take it seriously. The room was completely still. Gideon stood up. "Craig Weston's access badge is suspended effective this morning. Agnes will handle the formal process." His voice was calm, absolutely calm. "Pull every project she was assigned over the past year. I want to know what was originally hers and what was transferred. She will be compensated retroactively for every hour that wasn't in her original scope. He picked up the folder. And someone find out who approved the bonus redirection in December. He walked to the window. Outside, New Orleans was already moving. Streetcars, coffee shops, the slow warmth of a city that never quite rushed. He said it quietly enough that only Agnes heard. Nobody should have to disappear to prove they belong here. Simone went home from the hospital on a Thursday. By Monday, she was asking when she could return to work. Gideon's answer arrived by courier, a revised schedule, stamped with his personal authorization, that listed 40 hours per week as the ceiling. She called Agnes immediately. This has to be an error. It isn't, Agnes said. I have 3 active projects, 2 of which have been redistributed. The third has an extended deadline. A pause. Mr. Thorne didn't need to do this. Agnes smiled on her end of the line. He's aware. When Simone returned to the office, something had shifted that she couldn't immediately name. Her desk had been moved from the open floor to a quieter corner, with better light. The break room had a new coffee setup. Fully stocked, better quality. Because someone had apparently noticed that a significant portion of the staff was surviving on whatever they could find in the vending machine. She didn't know that Gideon had personally reviewed the floor plan. She didn't know he had asked Agnes to find out what kind of coffee she preferred. She didn't know, yet, that he had read every sticky note the building manager had quietly saved from the break room over the past year, all of them in her handwriting. Eat something that isn't from the machine today. The soup place on Magazine Street delivers. You look tired. Go home before 9, please. There are apples on the second shelf. He had read each one. Then he had put them back in the folder and kept it in his desk drawer. The Thorne Foundation's annual fundraising dinner was held 6 weeks later at the Roosevelt Hotel. Black tie invited guests. The kind of event that New Orleans society attended because the Thorne name opened every door and the charitable work was genuinely good. Simone almost didn't go. She owned exactly one formal dress, deep burgundy, simple, bought 2 years ago for a friend's wedding and never worn again. She stood in her apartment looking at it for 10 minutes before deciding that declining an invitation from Gideon Thorne's office was not something she was prepared to do. She arrived quietly, took a seat near the back, and was prepared to spend the evening invisible. Craig Weston found her in the first 20 minutes. His formal removal hadn't been made public yet. The board process moved slowly, deliberately, and he still held his title for another 2 weeks. He was the kind of man who, in his final weeks of power, spent that power badly. He approached with a drink in hand, and a smile that didn't move above his jaw. Simone, brave of you to come. Loud enough for the nearest table to hear. I would have thought you'd be too tired after your little episode. She turned to face him. I'm feeling better, thank you. Are you? He tilted his head. You know what I've been hearing? That the board thinks your collapse was a performance. That you saw an opportunity and took it. He laughed once lightly. No one works themselves into a hospital for legitimate reasons. Some people are just looking for attention they don't know how to earn properly. The table nearest them had gone very quiet. Simone kept her expression still. She had spent years keeping her expression still. I wasn't performing, she said. Of course not. He gestured vaguely toward her. Though, given your situation, he looked at her with an expression that didn't require words to complete. I suppose some people feel they have to try harder, to compensate. She felt it land the way it was meant to. The old weight, the familiar one. The voice that sounded like her ex, like the reflection she'd avoided for years, like every room she had ever walked into, already prepared to make herself smaller. She opened her mouth. She didn't get to speak. I think you've said enough. The voice came from behind her. Every conversation within 20 feet stopped. Gideon Thorne crossed the remaining distance in a few unhurried steps and positioned himself slightly in front of her. Not blocking her, not dismissing her presence, simply making his own unmistakably clear. He didn't look at Simone yet. He was looking at Craig Weston with the specific quality of attention that had ended careers and, in other rooms, other things. Sir, I was just. I heard what you were just. He let the sentence close itself. Weston laughed, uneasy. It was a joke, no harm. Let me tell you what I know, Gideon said. In the past year, this woman completed your quarterly audit, your compliance review, and the year-end reconciliation. Simultaneously, alone. She did it without complaint, without recognition, and without asking for a single additional dollar. He paused, while sending most of what she earned to cover her sister's cancer treatments. The room was listening now, all of it. She left food for a staff of 40 every Friday for 8 months, because she noticed people weren't eating properly. She trained junior employees on her own time. She covered work during 3 separate medical situations that had nothing to do with her. His gaze stayed fixed on Weston. That is what I know. He looked at Weston the way a man looks at something he is deciding where to put. What do you know? Weston said nothing. Then we're finished. Gideon turned, finally, toward Simone. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not the careful stillness she wore like armor, not the polite efficiency she carried through the office. Something had come loose in it. Something real. He extended his hand. Not as an employer, not as a command, simply as one person asking another to stay. After a moment, she placed her hand in his. He held it without apology, without explanation, without looking away from her face. The room had resumed its noise, but it felt far away. You don't have to make yourself small in any room I'm standing in, he said quietly, just for her. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. 3 months later, Simone Parrish became the Director of Operations Compliance for Thorne Financial. A newly created role, built around a gap in the organization that everyone had overlooked because the person quietly filling it had never asked for a title. She fought the promotion for 2 weeks. She argued that the role hadn't existed before her. Gideon's response, delivered in writing with his signature at the bottom, that's why it needed to be created. She argued that she wasn't qualified in the traditional sense. He wrote back, "You've been doing the job for 2 years without the salary. The argument doesn't hold." She showed up in his office doorway on a Tuesday morning with both letters in her hand. "You're not going to let me decline this." He looked up from his desk. No. She stood there. Then she sat down across from him because it was a long walk back, and she already knew she'd lost the argument. "Why?" she said. Not defensively, genuinely. There are people with MBAs and 15 years of experience who would want this position. Gideon set down his pen. He had thought about how to answer this for longer than he would admit. Not because he didn't know, but because the words felt too honest for a conference room. Too simple for a man whose world was complicated by design. "Because I've spent 20 years watching people perform competence," he said. "And I have spent exactly 1 year watching someone actually be it." She was quiet. "You left food for people who weren't even in your department. You stayed late for work that wasn't yours. You reduced your own expenses to keep your sister alive and never told a single person who could have helped you." He paused. "That isn't a resume quality. That's a character one." "That's not a job qualification," she said softly. "Maybe not. But it's the reason this place works." His voice dropped slightly. "And the reason I don't leave until I know you're already gone." She looked up. He met her eyes without flinching. "You know I've noticed," he said. It wasn't a question. She had known. For weeks she had known. The coffee, the light in her corner of the office, the schedule that had been quietly adjusted before she could protest. Small things, precise things. The same way she left apples on a shelf with a handwritten note for people who didn't know they needed them. He had learned her language and begun speaking it back. "I didn't think you'd," she stopped. "Say it," he said. "I didn't think someone like you would bother," she said honestly, "with someone like me." He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. The careful composure, precise and controlled the way everything about him was precise and controlled. And underneath it, just briefly, was something unguarded. "I've been in rooms with powerful people my entire life," he said. "I know what it looks like when someone is performing strength. I know what it looks like when someone actually has it." He held her gaze. "You have it. You've always had it. You just spent years giving it to other people before you could use any of it for yourself." She felt the sentence go somewhere deep and difficult to name. "That's what I noticed," he said. "Not first, but most." Outside the window, New Orleans moved through its morning, unhurried, layered, full of things that couldn't be explained to someone who had never been there. Simone looked at her hands. She thought about her sister, whose last scan had come back clean. She thought about the break room on Friday mornings, the sticky notes she'd stopped signing because it had felt like enough just to leave them. She thought about how long she had believed that invisibility was a form of safety. She thought about a man who had sat beside a hospital bed for 4 hours with his phone face down on the table. "I'm not good at being taken care of," she said. "I know," he almost smiled. "I've been watching you resist it for 3 months." She laughed, small and surprised, out before she could make it careful. He looked at her the way he had in the Roosevelt ballroom. Direct, certain, without the armor that covered everything else in his life. "I'm not asking you to stop being who you are," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to stop doing it alone." The morning light came through the window at a low angle, the way it did in November in New Orleans, soft and unhurried. Simone Parrish, who had spent 3 years making herself hard to see, easy to overlook, invisible enough to survive, reached across the desk and closed her hand around his. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to.